Hi everyone, my name is Martin Köring. I'm a Senior Manager for Sustainability, Climate Change and Natural Resources, as well as the Head of the World Ocean Initiative at Economist Impact. So I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar on food sustainability. So we're just launching the Food Sustainability Index, the latest iteration, which is really exciting given how important food systems are for global climate targets, for meeting the SDGs. So it's a really important and exciting time for food systems globally. So we're very excited to launch the latest iteration of the index. So we'd like to welcome you to this webinar. Just a few words on Economist Impact. So we are part of the Economist Group that also produces the Economist newspaper, obviously very much focusing on rigorous independent reporting. And we also have Economist Education, which is focusing on providing courses for practitioners, individuals to advance their careers. We also have Economist Intelligence, which is the subscription part of the business, focusing on data analysis and forecasting. And then, of course, we have Economist Impact, which we're very excited about launching, which is focusing on insights, innovation, and influence. It's really about combining the rigor of a think tank with the creativity of a media brand to engage globally influential audiences, but also to create kind of evidence-based insights, to open debate, broaden perspectives, and also to catalyze progress around the world. And of course, the Food Sustainability Index is a crucial part of the work we do at Economist Impact to catalyze this progress around the world. So just in terms of how we are going to structure the conversation today, so we will start with an introduction. So we've just kind of had a very brief introduction to what we do at Economist Impact. So just a brief introduction also at what the Food Sustainability Index is all about. And then we will hand over to Marta Antonelli. She's the head of research at the Barilla Centre for Food and Nutrition Foundation, to give her remarks and reaction to the latest findings of the index. And then we will walk through the findings from the index, and then we will hand over to two experts that we have invited to give their commentary and their reaction to the findings from the index, but also to highlight what they are doing in terms of promoting sustainable food systems around the world. And then we will also have opportunities for Q&A. So please send your questions in through the Q&A function on Zoom. We will, look at the questions and make sure that we can feature some of those during the Q&A discussion. So just in terms of where we have come, where the index has come from, and the history of the index. So we started in 2016. We have worked with the support of BCFN, the Barilla Foundation, since 2016 to create this index. So we started in 2016 with 25 countries, and then building on that in 2017, 34 countries. With 35 indicators and 55 individual metrics. Also in 2017, we focused particularly on highlighting the food sustainability opportunities and challenges in the Mediterranean region. And then in 2018, we extended the index further. So we looked at including sub-Saharan Africa. So then we had 67 countries, 37 indicators, and we really focused on integrating the Sustainable Development Goals more closely into the index. And then, of course, now is the time, to further extend the index. So we've expanded the index to 78 countries, now including 38 indicators, 95 individual metrics, and now covering 92% of global GDP as well as 92% of the global population. So very global, very representative of the planet and how food systems are evolving. Then, just in terms of where we are in terms of the structure of the index itself. So we have these 78 countries. The basis is the 2015 BCFN Milan protocol that identified three key challenges for global food systems. So we have food loss and waste, sustainable agriculture, and nutritional challenges. And these are the three pillars of the index. And here you can see the elements of these different pillars. So for food loss and waste, We focus on food loss, so this is kind of post-harvest. So this is basically where the food originates, and then we have food waste, where it's kind of focusing on consumer, retail level food waste. And of course, we need to look at both aspects so that we incorporate the full value chain of food production and consumption. And then we have sustainable agriculture, which has 3 key pillars, looking at water, land, and air. And then, of course, nutritional challenges, looking at quality of life, life expectancy, and dietary patterns. And as I mentioned, now the 2021 index now has 38 indicators, 95 sub-indicators that look at food systems in this holistic way across societal, environmental, and economic themes. And what was very important for us in the latest iteration of the index is that we included new indicators that really encapsulate the evolution of food systems and the challenges that food systems face. Some of those key issues, of course, are around the resilience of food systems with COVID and the challenges to supply chains. The One Health approach to really look at health in a more integrated way and really including food into that. The affordability of healthy and sustainable diets, particularly with COVID challenges, adding to the challenge. The planetary health diet and other diets that are deemed sustainable and healthy. Food-based dietary guidelines as governments, want to implement sustainable food policies. Guidelines are crucial. And then, of course, we look at climate change mitigation, adaptation. We had, a lot of focus on climate change last year with COP26, and food systems and climate change are crucially interlinked. Also including more on gender equality, diversity issues, and animal welfare. So, and more on these issues can be found in our methodology paper. So in addition to the global executive summary and the global map where you can delve into all of the key findings, we also have a methodology paper that highlights these additional issues that we added. So now I'd like to hand over to Marta Antonelli, the head of research at the Barilla Centre for Food and Nutrition Foundation, for her reaction, her remarks on the latest iteration of the index.
Thank you very much, Martin, and good afternoon to everyone. So it is my pleasure to give you all a warm welcome to this webinar on behalf of the Barilla Foundation. And today we are very happy because we present an important project that was started in 2016, believing that the food system was in need of a transformation from farm to fork. And I have to say that this is still the case, because today food systems still fail to provide adequate access to sufficient and nutritious food to all people in the world. Malnutrition is on the rise, as well as non-communicable diseases related to poor diets. Agriculture is still both a cause and a victim of climate change and resource insecurity, and food loss and food waste still account for a staggering 1/3 of all food that is produced worldwide. So we are not on track on achieving many SDGs, especially SDG 2. And COVID-19 has further exacerbated food-related challenges. And I also think that COVID-19 has shown us that the only way ahead is shifting the approach from business as usual to a One Health approach that through food takes care of us all and also of the planet. So food is the strongest leverage that we have to make present and future generations thrive on the planet. And our contribution with this index is to measure what we have to manage better. So here we are with this very ambitious project that aims to navigate the complexity of food systems by providing a ready-to-use tool for policymakers, for educators, for business, for media, and really everyone to understand food systems, its challenges, and also its opportunities. So I hope you will enjoy it as we have enjoyed the journey with the Economist Impact. Thanks, and over to you, Martin.
Brilliant, thanks so much, Marta. It's been a very enjoyable journey, as you mentioned, and also a very impactful journey, taking the index around the world and now launching the latest iteration. So as Marta mentioned, there are many challenges, but food and integrating food into the global conversations around climate, around how we can create more sustainable response to climate change, but also in terms of the One Health approach, as Marta mentions, means that now we need to look at food systems broadly. And what we did in the index is really highlight the importance of this systems-based approach that Marta also just highlighted, which is really looking at food systems as being integrated into wider social and economic developments. So we make sure that we compare the index with other key global indexes to make sure that, to analyze the correlation. And what we find is that progress on the FSI correlates with progress also on human development, progress in achieving the SDGs, with income, but also with gender equality, for example, health expenditure and higher education. You can delve into all of that data and the correlation, but this chart already shows the correlation with many of these other societal and economic indicators. So if we then look at the overall index, we can see that as a group, the top performers, they have strong outputs, but also they have strong policies. And what we want to make sure in the index is that we capture both. I mean, we capture both inputs and outputs. So we capture both, the policy environment and what needs to feed into the food systems and into building sustainable food systems, as well as the results of these policies and these actions. And so what we found is that the top performers generally do well on both, particularly in food loss and waste and nutrition challenges. But of course, there's always room for improvement. Here you can see the top performers and the ones that are still face challenges in their food systems. So if we look at the different pillars, I mentioned we have the three pillars, and one of them is food loss and waste. So first of all, if we just look at food loss, I mean, it affects lower income countries in particular, but food waste is a global issue that affects both higher income and lower income or middle income countries. The top, and if we just look at the top performers, there are strong policies, but there's still, even in the top performers, there is still room for improvement in terms of better legislation, also market-based instruments and voluntary agreements. So even the top performers still face those challenges. Here are a couple of snapshots, some of the key data that comes out of the index when we look at food loss and waste. And it's just not enough to prioritize food loss and waste at the policy level. What we find is that where food loss is highest, food loss strategies are also absent. Some of the findings here are quite striking. So we see that just 22 out of the 78 countries in the index have a dedicated food waste strategy. Even though 1/3 of all food produced globally is wasted, only 22 of those 78 countries have a dedicated food waste strategy. On average, 85 kilograms of food is wasted per head per year across the countries in the FSI. And if we look at the issue of food loss across the index, we see that food loss is among all of the countries is 6% on average, but the variety and the kind of diversity of performance is wide. So we can see, for example, that there's an average of 1 to 28% of all food produced that is lost. So there's a wide range of performance across the countries in the index. 32 out of the 78 countries have a food loss strategy that targets the entire supply chain. So even though we have food loss, identified as a key issue, still, less than half of countries have this targeted supply chain approach, and 6 out of those 20 countries with the highest volume of food loss have food loss strategies. So it's clearly they need, much more needs to happen to address this issue at the strategic level as well. So if we then look at some of the findings from the food loss and waste pillars, so we have Canada, Italy, Germany, Japan, and the Netherlands are the top 5 performers. What are they doing well? So 3% of the food that is produced in those countries is lost. I mean, the average in the FSI is 6%, as I mentioned earlier. So in all the countries among those top performers, except France and Spain, have a food loss strategy that addresses the entire supply chain. I mentioned earlier how important it is to look at the entire supply chain. Now with, with COVID, for example, but also climate change, highlighting the importance of having a supply chain approach. This is a crucial issue. So we have, in all these 20 countries, we have dedicated food waste strategies, targets, research, and private institutions. So clearly they're doing something right in terms of strategy, setting targets, putting the research institutions in place. But there's still a lot of room for improvement even in those countries. So really look at the policy actions in a comprehensive way. So we look at household food waste, still very high. It's 70 kilograms per head per year, which is just below the average, but still very high, even in those top performers. And of course, in terms of legislation, market-based instruments, there's still a need to, to get to best practice, even in those top countries. Only 7 of the top performers have both food waste legislation and market-based instruments. So clearly, it's still lots of room for improvement, even in the top performers. We wanted to highlight a couple of case studies as well, and throughout the analysis. And here we wanted to highlight Italy's food waste legislation, which is encouraging food donations by protecting donors from legal liability. So first of all, if we just start by looking at what Italy has done, so they have a dedicated Good Samaritan law, which protects food donors from legal liability. And then, this legislation provides extra levels of reassurance to donors that encourages food donation without compromising food safety. So clearly, this is a good example of a Good Samaritan law that helps to protect food donors. Then we have the Gada Law that builds on the 2003 Good Samaritan law. It creates a national regulatory framework for food donation. It clarifies how existing rules on tax concessions, civil liability, and procedures and so on for health and hygiene apply to food donations. So clearly there is, there's progress here that has helped to award reductions in waste taxes as well. So clearly policies are encouraging action on food loss and food waste. There is a lot of, good examples here, but we do highlight other examples throughout the index. If we then look at the sustainable agriculture pillar, so the second pillar in the index, we can see that some of the largest agricultural emitters in the index fall short in integrating climate action with agricultural activities, and that's despite the fact that we've just highlighted how important climate action is and how important food systems are to really react to climate change and making food systems a positive contribution to tackling climate change. So there's really this kind of need to ensure that those policies, when it comes to sustainable agriculture, are monitored, implemented, and linked to clear qualitative targets. And we see that the top performers in the index are doing that. But it is also important to highlight that the largest emitters in terms of agricultural emissions lack agricultural policies that really comprehensively mainstream climate change. And that's really something that needs to be addressed. So if you look at this chart, you can see the correlation there in terms of greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture and whether the country mainstreams climate change into its agricultural policies. And it's clearly not happening as much as it could be across countries. So the ones that do it, have this high bar, but clearly, you can see that, countries that have high emissions do not necessarily have those policies in place. So clearly, there's still a lot of room for improvement for really looking at food systems and climate change in terms of policies in those countries. Similarly, if we look at the largest agricultural emitters, also aren't really prioritizing agriculture and their nationally determined contributions. So very similar picture where you can see that there's a lot of room for improvement in terms of integrating those in their adaptation targets. The NDCs, obviously, the nationally determined contributions, are increasingly in the spotlight, with COP26 again highlighting that countries have to be more ambitious. And this year's COP27 will, really put scrutiny on this topic. And agricultural emissions are clearly not yet really fully incorporated and prioritized in those nationally determined contributions. Then, we have, all heard about the international climate commitments, that need to be adopted. And as I mentioned, COP27 will, put this again in the spotlight. But if we look at the index, we find, international climate commitments in high-income countries in particular, they tend to lack specific mitigation adaptation targets for agriculture. So again, a very similar picture. that that climate change in terms of mitigation adaptation targets are not really including actions for agriculture and the NDC. So there is a clear gap in terms of linking climate action and food system action. And then if we look at the key the countries that do really well here and sustainable agriculture, so we have Finland, Estonia, Austria, Tanzania, and Sweden. You can see here in the mix of countries that is not only high income countries that are doing well in this regard. So the top 20 countries, they're spending on research and development. I mentioned how important that is to perform well, is that investment in research and development to look at developing agricultural innovation, but also having the right policy response in place to encourage sustainable agriculture. So all of the 20 countries have research institutions in place that provide technical assistance to farmers. Their training programs, public financing for agriculture innovation is available in those countries. But there's still this gap between policy and outcomes that is really prevalent in this particular pillar. 19 out of the 20 countries, the top 20 performers, have sustainable agriculture strategies in place. More than half are in the bottom of 20 for the use of pesticides and synthetic fertilizers. So there's still this overuse and over-reliance on pesticides and synthetic fertilizers among those countries. Just 4 out of the top 20 countries prioritize agriculture and their NDCs. I mentioned earlier how important that is, even though almost half are among the largest agricultural greenhouse gas emitters in the FSI. So clearly this gap between action on agriculture and climate is there. There's another case study here that I wanted to highlight on sustainable agriculture, and that's the example of Nigeria that has mainstreamed agriculture through mitigation adaptation measures. So we look at the NDC so the National Determined Contribution in Nigeria lists climate smart agriculture as one of the 6 mitigation measures. Potential greenhouse gas emission reductions of 74 million tons per year are included by 2030. It highlights 3 adaptation strategies for agriculture: adopting improved agricultural systems, for example, diversifying livestock, improving range management, and so on, implementing strategies for improved resource management as well, for example, increased rainwater and sustainable groundwater harvesting, and also focus on the agricultural impacts of the savanna zones. So there's clearly something that Nigeria is doing that others can learn from in terms of mainstreaming agriculture through mitigation adaptation measures. And finally, the third pillar of the index, nutritional challenges. So here we have this double burden, we have the double burden of overnourishment and poor diet composition. So these are key issues that are faced by many countries. And if you look at the higher income countries, particularly, there's this combination of overnourishment and poor diet. Whereas undernourishment, low life expectancy, and high NCD mortality as well, non-communicable diseases, is prevalent in lower income countries. Of course, lower income countries often also have that problem of overnourishment in other ways. So there's this double burden. But the former, so the countries, the higher income countries that face this, overnourishment and diet composition problems, they're starting to incorporate sustainability into their dietary recommendations. Whereas the latter, if we look at countries that have undernourishment issues, there is still this issue around affordability of healthy and sustainable diets, and we will look at that in more detail shortly. And for some countries in the index, there's still this double burden of malnutrition, where both these challenges exist at the same time. So now if we look at the countries that are doing well in this particular pillar of the index, countries with lower levels of GDP are generally unable to afford healthy and sustainable diets. So actually this one is the one that I mentioned earlier, where we look at that burden. So before we look at the countries that are doing well, I just wanted to hone in on this particular issue on the affordability, because this was something that was really thrown in the spotlight through COVID as well. And of course the challenges that we have with affordability of a sustainable and healthy diet. So really this nexus between diet and sustainability needs to be strengthened so that they can overcome this barrier. So addressing issues around malnutrition, high NCD mortality, and low life expectancy. So we can see here in this chart that a healthy and sustainable diet remains unaffordable in many lower income countries. So there's clearly this, if we look at the GDP performance and affordability of a healthy and sustainable diet, in a lot of countries, there is this, this problem that, a healthy and sustainable diet just isn't affordable. So that is still a crucial issue as the world needs to move towards more sustainable food systems and healthy food and nutrition as well. So then if we look at the countries that aren't doing well in the index, we can see that Japan, Sweden, Denmark, France, and China are among the best performing countries for nutritional challenges. They have lower levels of stunting, wasting, and undernutrition, anemia, mortality rates from NCDs as well. And also with the exception of China, a healthy and sustainable diet is generally affordable in those countries. There's widespread access to improved water sources, for example. All of those 20 countries have healthy eating guidelines. The majority have updated their food-based dietary guidelines. I mentioned earlier how important these guidelines are, and also compulsory nutrition education. There's still this issue around policy inconsistency. So what we have here is that healthy eating policies are in place in all of the 20 countries, but overweight is prevalent, and so is the overconsumption of sugar, meat, saturated fat, and salt. So there is clearly still this issue of having those guidelines, these policies, but then still having this prevalence of overweight. More than half of the countries, the top performers, continue to subsidize sugar, and they lack any taxes on sugar or sugar-sweetened beverages, which is a crucial omission. Then we have the environmental impact of diets, among the top performers. There is that, the only 7 of those countries have incorporated sustainability into their food-based dietary guidelines. So similarly to the climate and agriculture issue, we also here have this issue that even the top performers haven't really fully incorporated sustainability into their healthy eating guidelines, their food-based dietary guidelines. So that's clearly a lack and room for improvement. So if we then look at a case study here in terms of, and I mentioned earlier, we have lots of case studies that we can look at, but here we have picked Denmark, which has its food-based dietary guidelines that account for the environmental footprint of dietary choices. So this is a really good example. The Danish Veterinary and Food Administration has published updates of their official guidelines, which consists of 7 themes, and it highlights the need to take sustainability and environmental protection into consideration. Each of the themes is not only considered with regard to its health effects on humans, but also in terms of how these recommendations reduce environmental footprint. So I mentioned earlier how important it is to link health and environment. And here the food guidelines in Denmark are a good example of how this can be done. So now I would really like to hear from our guest speakers so that they can react to the findings from the index and also give their view of how they see sustainable food systems emerge. So I'd like to hand the floor to Ajay Virjakar. He is chairman of Bharat Krishak Samaj, it's the Farmers Forum in India, and he's also a former vice chair of Action Track 2 of the UN Food Systems Summit that took place last year. So Ajay, your reaction and your comment.
I hope you can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for this opportunity to participate in the launch of the Food Sustainability Index, which examines food systems of 78 countries across 3 key pillars, as you've just discussed. The index is really fascinating, and I congratulate the team for the effort and the outcome. My points are, the real challenge now is how do we draw inferences from this index? How do we use this index? This index can be used in both ways. For example, when you look at the overall performance, the first thing that stands out is that the bottom 1/3 or maybe nearly half of the countries in the index are in Africa. Now, I don't know if you realize the elephant in the room is that these are the countries where Alliance for African Green Revolution, AGRA, has been working for decades, spending over $1 billion in the last 10 years, I think. So do countries need to rethink the strategy and approach to improve performance, or just need more money to continue on the same path? My opinion is a copy-paste of the Western model for Africa will not work. So the key point that I'm giving in my comments is that inference of the index is the real challenge. There is very clear messaging that food loss and waste. My 2 comments would be, we also need to measure what is the food loss and waste in food processing and consumption stage. I believe it's much more at this point than it is on the primary agriculture on the farm itself. And can we mitigate food loss and waste by reducing food miles and investing in local food loops, which will also help attain nutrition targets, rather than only look at creating food value chains which take food across continents, across oceans. Governments spend money on research, have a long-term vision, and have more sustainable practices. My opinion is that ultimately on sustainable agriculture, it's a political call of the political parties, of the administration, on restructuring farm subsidies to make them more compatible with climate change and sustainability agenda, because countries and leaders do not have the political capital and the will to make decisions which may not seem populist in the short term. And the other point that comes in on sustainable agriculture is, how do we factor in monoculture as a biodiversity killer? Which takes us to the next question is, does technology like GM crops have a direct correlation with biodiversity loss? If you look at crops in a process rather than as in yields, as how do we measure it? The nutrition challenges are very well defined. And I just want to add as a farmer that most of the hungry and malnutrition live in rural areas where food is produced. And this is the question that needs to be discussed more and more as a narrative in discussions. So different strategies would be required for better off. Nations will require more on consumption behavior, diet choices, while the poor have problems of affordability. The last point I would want to put is that the index shows a mirror to where we are in the pecking order and now can be used to design a strategy. What is also apparent with my experience at the Food Systems Summit is that no country in the world has a food systems approach where we take the health of the people and the planet as one. Now, when you add to this the objective of giving and creating dignified livelihoods for the producers and stakeholders, this becomes even more complex. And designing a food systems approach is so complex that and so daunting that I doubt if any country will actually move towards this seriously in the next few years. And that becomes a big problem. We need new measurement indexes like true cost of food, payment for farm ecosystem services. We need investment in such things. Thank you, and maybe I'll come back again in the Q&A session. Thank you for this.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Ajay. That was really important. You highlighted the need for strategy, to rethink strategy, the elements of, the political dimensions, the need to revisit this topic of monoculture and technology, but also the need for focus on rural areas and the need for this food systems approach, as you mentioned, that very few countries have that, or maybe no country, as you mentioned. So I'd also like to now ask Rodrigo Pacheco. He's the founder and executive chef at Boca Valdivia, and also he's UN FAO Goodwill Ambassador for Latin America. Rodrigo.
Thank you very much for the invitation, Martin, and thank you, the Economist Impact, for this opportunity to learn more about this important index that represents such crucial data for us, for governments, for institutions, for final consumers to really understand what's on stake. Climate change is knocking at our doors, and we must act, and that's a very good way to give the importance necessary on this index that represents also alliances between the institutions, between foundations, and this can be really applied hopefully in countries where the actions need to be taken. In my case, just this is something I started 10 years ago when I started planting the first edible forest, and by this experience I have learned many things, especially of how we can solve many of the global issues that are affecting our climate sovereignty, and how by doing this type of agriculture that is really an opportunity to integrate three different pillars as we do, and we install in this highly biodiverse edible forest, there's the bioeconomy present also, the transmission of knowledge is present as well, and then the ecology part So what we're doing is creating and redesigning ecosystems, food ecosystems, but they are also producing not only food, not only shelter or medicine, but they're also producing economic opportunities. They're also capturing carbon. They're also are able to reconcile our relationship with the wildlife. They're giving back biodiversity. They're preserving the water resources. They're providing us with climate resilience. And this is what we're talking about now is in a positive way of just trying to understand how a highly biodiverse edible forest, how our actions, if we redesign ecosystems in a smart way where we can have a clever relationship with the flora around us, I think we have an opportunity to shift into a model that especially countries like Ecuador can really use to improve their production, their policies, and really redefine, rethink the food systems, creating added value from the forest, avoiding unnecessary chains that are producing all this waste in the world. So this one thing is to create the policies and to be able to understand this from the desk. But also another thing is to be able to plant it and to experience and to follow the cycle of life of plants, of the planet itself, and then really understand that we've been walking in circles for quite a while. And now the United Nations is very clear and it's telling us how important it is to act now that we're facing maybe 60 harvests that are left before the earth starts desertifying. So let's do something. And this is what I've done as a chef, creating this ecosystem that at the end became this bio corridor, not only this food garden for a gastronomic purpose, but it became a solution for this bioregion, providing people for an opportunity of creating economy or improving their quality of life, and also producing food and again, reconnecting landscapes, reconnecting cultures through this work. I've seen it in 10 years. I've seen it working. I've seen it working for nature. I've seen it working for the community. I've seen it working for me as a chef in a restaurant, for tourism, and yet we are still focusing in monocultures. We're still promoting the consumption of these 20 or 40 crops that are invading our diets and that are actually making us blind from all the biodiversity that is present in the world, and that we must give back and we must use. So for me to be able to have installed this in an ecosystem and add value of what we find in nature and really, as I said, being able to follow the cycle of life of the plants and has been very, very interesting for me to share. You can see it in my social media, you can see it in my work, and also this has been promoted by audiovisual platforms all over the world. We have a solution, and this can be replicated in different territories. You can't go wrong with this. You can't go wrong when you plant biodiversity. There's nothing wrong with it. There's no pre-established system. It's just intuition of how humans must have a clever relationship with the flora around us, and that will be something that will determine our survival in the planet. So let's shift to these systems. Let's create this biodiverse forest. Let's create added value from the forest so we avoid these chains of waste. And then let's try to inspire more people to also develop their own solutions for the world's problems without pointing it to the authorities, without pointing it to other people, but to creating alliances. COVID has taught us a great lesson, and I'm going to finish with this. And this is that we need to work as a team. If we want development, if we want a bright future for our generations, if we want climate sovereignty, we need to act as a team, including different institutions, local governments, and just common people like me that are trying to do something to solve this problem.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Rodrigo. And, it's really fascinating to hear your story. And you're really, what you're doing is really a great example of, sustainable food systems in practice. And you mentioned, a couple of, really crucial points, creating this kind of bioeconomy, looking at sharing knowledge, designing food ecosystems, looking at this kind of ecosystem approach, looking not only at policies, but also looking at the plants and the experience and redesigning ecosystems. And also, as you said, creating those alliances. And hopefully this webinar and the broader work that we are all doing together can help to create those alliances. So please also, to anyone in the audience, share your examples and your work in the chat, and also ask your questions in the Q&A. So now we have a couple of opportunities to go to some of those questions from the Q&A. So one question that is more immediate on the index itself is what are the key areas for further research going forward? Have you identified any gaps? So just in terms of the index itself, there's a lot of exciting things. As you said, we are evolving, and we are always looking at evolving the index and making sure that there is that we capture the whole food systems and different new developments. So in terms of how we are looking to integrate some of these new developments, and so for example agriculture technology, we're looking at capturing this in the research given its potential benefits for productivity, but also we're looking at including other aspects of that, namely regenerative agriculture, which we have in a way included in some indicators, looking, for example, at tenets of like soil quality, crop production, soil erosion, organic carbon stock, and those kind of things, environmental biodiversity indicators. And we want to kind of include this more and more as we develop this theme further. We're also looking at food consumption trends, looking at COVID-19, of course, has affected how we eat, what we eat, prevalence of home cooking, and these kind of things. All of these are, will impact, the prevalence of food loss and waste and these kind of things. So, of course, these are all trends that we'd like to include. And I mentioned earlier that we have the methodology report of the Food Sustainability Index that you can look into. So then, so for RJ, we have a question here. What are the key challenges involved in pushing for a farmer-centric approach to food systems?
I think the key challenge is that most governments focus on food inflation. And by trying to keep food prices low for consumers, and which is a very, very valid reason, they push down farm gate prices. And those low farm gate prices leads to most poor people in the world living in the villages, most of the hungry living in the villages, and also it inhibits farmers from adopting sustainable practices. Farmers are only going to adopt sustainable practices where they grow food in a way which is good for the climate, and they grow more nutritious food in ways which is good for everyone, only if they get a fair price for it. So I think farmers are not being paid a good price for the food, and that is a key challenge for a farmer-centric approach. And I'll just add another point. I think this is from what Roderick said, is that we need an approach where everyone needs to come in, the whole world needs to come in as one. And there's a common narrative that goes around in the world, especially it's been happening in the food systems, UN Food Systems Summit, and even otherwise, is that repurposing of subsidies will make a difference and everything will fall in place. I really doubt it, because 80% of the subsidies in the world are being given to 20% of the farmers. Now, if they're going to if those 20% of the farmers, the developed world, is going to repurpose subsidies amongst their own farmers, it's not going to help the rest of the world. So if a repurposing of subsidies is required, I think some of the tab for sustainable agriculture practices will need to be picked up by the developed world to help the developing world meet its challenges. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, RJ. We have a question here for Rodrigo. How can this, so what you're doing, be replicated elsewhere in the world with interesting results?
As I said, there's nothing that can go wrong in this. No matter where you are in the world, the fact that you create food cells, that you create new ecosystems, focusing on native species, focusing on food perennial species that can be and can represent investments that are long-term investments that will bring definitely will bring a great deal of solutions. So you can't go wrong. Just what is necessary is to use the land to understand the functioning of the planet, and then try to create ecosystems with logic, trying to replicate the functioning of nature. You can do it in many places in the world. Maybe what will be different is the amount of biodiversity that you can integrate due to climate conditions, but then there's nothing that can go wrong. And the more actions that we're taking towards this, they're going to be transforming solutions for the future. So follow my advice, try to grow your own food, because small actions from ourselves, from consumers, are meaningful. Sometimes we try to transform companies, we try to transform societies, but we're not able to transform our own home. We're not able to transform our own habits. And this is adding up to the problem. So this is a call to action and a way for people to understand that either you support important actions for the benefit of biodiversity, or you create your own, but don't stay with your arms crossed.
Yeah, great point. And it's really, you know, as we said, you know, it's about action, you know, moving from, and that's why we produce the index. I mean, we want to set the scene and highlight what's working and what isn't working, but then it's really about action, and everyone can have an impact. Here's a question from Dan Crossley, and great, Dan, that you're tuning in, and we have worked closely in the past. And he says, you know, we at the Food Ethics Council have used the index as a great provocation to talk with food businesses and policymakers in the UK. How do you hope the Food Sustainability Index will be used in countries around the world? And that's a great question. And that's really something that we are very interested in, very aware of, that the index is used. And what we did, for example, is we went to the World Green Economy Summit. We presented the index to wider audiences of policymakers, business, civil society stakeholders, farmers associations such as RJs, but also chefs and the gastronomy like Rodrigo. So making sure that we integrate different stakeholders in different countries. We also presented in Dubai at the Food Safety Conference, and we presented in New York City Climate Week. So we're taking the index around the world. We want to make sure that it is used, and we know that you know, it has an impact. And it's great to work with Dan and others, the Food Ethics Council, to kind of help in the UK, but we know that it is also helpful in other countries, and we are looking for those collaborations to make sure that the index has maximum impact around the world. So now we have a question here for RJ. Moving forward, how should we deal with industrial agriculture and monoculture?
I think these are elephants in the room that policymakers, politicians, private sector, they all tend to avoid looking at, and they tend to ignore. And this happens because there is a consolidation in the food value chains, which works in a particular way. They want systems to work in a particular way, and that poses a threat to the transformation we are looking at. I think these need to be highlighted. As I earlier said, that monoculture as a part of is how is it valued in a sustainability parameters in your index becomes important as we go forward. I really think these are big problems. Biodiversity is not still recognized. Biodiversity loss on farms is not recognized as an existential crisis. Normally, when we discuss biodiversity loss, we only look at Amazon forest deforestation, but how agriculture happens, how we're using the same varieties. You know, what farmers tend to use the best seeds which will give the best yields, and that leads to even a varietal biodiversity loss within the cropping pattern where monoculture is happening. So it's really a difficult situation.
Rodrigo, would you like to respond to this question as well?
Well, talking about biodiversity, to understand the term better, we talk about ecosystem biodiversity, and then we talk about species biodiversity, and then to genetic biodiversity. And what AJ is saying is totally right, and is a great way to explain it. We're losing biodiversity. We're losing also the opportunity for the earth to perform in its full capacity. So we're limiting the earth functioning by creating these new ecosystems in a negative way, but by not replicating nature and trying to create something that it doesn't make sense. It's just clear, and it's killing us. So might as well try to look to biodiversity as a solution and try to be part of rescuing it. Now I'm in South America, and it's true what AJ is saying. Everything is focused on the Amazon rainforest, but there's tropical rainforests, there are mangroves, there are different types of ecosystems in the highlands that represent also this great amount of biodiversity in the world, and that most of the energy is not focusing on these, and this we need to shift our attention into the real people that can become one of the greatest solutions of our time, farmers. So that's my opinion on that.
Thanks a lot, Rodrigo. Ajay, you wanted to respond to that?
Yes, on this point of monoculture, I want to give an example from my home state in Punjab in India, which is the Green Revolution state in India. I come from a part of Punjab where we do not have monoculture of paddy and wheat, two crop monoculture. But most of the state has a monoculture of just paddy and wheat year and decade after decade. Now, when you do monoculture, the opportunity of creating jobs, rural area jobs and employment is very limited, and it leads to farmer suicides. So what we have seen is where there is more diversified agriculture, there are more job opportunities, there's more employment opportunities, and people live better. So it's just not about the environment. When we talk about a food systems approach, it's just not about one health of the planet and the people. It's also about dignified livelihoods of producers, and biodiverse agriculture will provide for that. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot, Ajay. Here's a question that, actually in a way follows up on that. I mean, what are your suggestions on balancing the trade-off between intensive agriculture for increased production and biodiversity sustainable agriculture? These aspects have an implication on accessibility of food waste, therefore nutritional challenges and so on. Do you see that trade-off? Is there a trade-off?
Yes, I think so. Everything has a trade-off. There's nothing that comes free. There's no free lunches in this world. There is a trade-off, and we need more research on it. I'm not saying we can do away with monoculture all of a sudden, but I think if you look at the agriculture research system, even within my own country where I am in India and other countries, most of the research is still going in for crops which will be grown in as monoculture crops. So there is not money. There's not much money being spent on natural farming, on intercropping, and other kinds of cropping systems. So we are basically spending money, agriculture research, on better yielding crops rather than spending money on systems approach. How we could have a more diverse cropping systems. So till we don't spend more money on research, we're not going to get a solution. And I don't have these trade-offs are very, very complex for me to even understand for myself, to tell you the truth.
Rodrigo, do you have a suggestions of how to balance this trade-off?
Yes, as we speak, the world is desertifying. What needs to be done is for governments and institutions and whoever has the economic power to shift it into better practices. No, as AJ said, there's a lot of research going on, but a few actions are being taken. Why? Because they believe it's not to be profitable, because it sounds, we have already adapted our minds so much for monoculture that now it's become something strange to plant biodiversity. It's become something innovative, yet it is the most ancestral thinking. Is an example of how our ancient cultures had success or failure depending on how they were having this relationship with the flora around us. So yes, please, let's bring back biodiversity. Yes, let's understand that there's no more time for monocultures. I think we need to totally shift to biodiversity, and these will bring a great amount of solutions for the world. No matter in which region of the world we're talking about, we are facing the same problems. AJ is talking about Indian farmers, and I'm talking about the South American people, and we're all facing the same. We're together on this. So yes, please, let's bring attention to projects like ours, like that are promoting this biodiversity as a solution for the world, and that definitely can find economic opportunities, not only because the production of the crops, but agrotourism and also other ways of creating added value to what it exists, to healthy ecosystems. Healthy ecosystems can be highly rich in food for people and for other species.
Yeah, thanks a lot, both for highlighting that, economic impact as well of biodiversity and the positive economic impact. There's a question here on the index. Any idea on integrating indicators on social sustainability, for example, health and safety of workers in the supply chain, child labor, migrant workers, and so on? We do already have, in a way, indicators for those in terms of the protection of smallholders, for example, is one of the indicators. We're also looking at incorporating the kind of social considerations more going forward in the index. I mean, we've looked at migration, for example, as something that we looked at potentially including in the index, but there weren't any concrete indicators related to its impact on food systems. And therefore, we integrate it as a background indicator for now. So you can have a look at the background indicators in the full workbook that is part of the index on the website. And I'll mention the website as well. We still have a couple of minutes left, and please keep your answers brief. So if you have a question here for both, actually, RJ and Rodrigo, what is the impact of urbanization on food sustainability? RJ, would you like to react to that?
I think people are, I don't know if, I would prefer to come to the point that urbanization is happening because people are poor on the farm. So more and more people are shifting to the cities. And that's what's leading to urbanization. And urbanization is obviously gobbling up agriculture land in most places. Good agriculture land is being gobbled up, and it's leading to long food value chains, which is leading to food loss, which is leading to other problems. It's basically poverty on the farms. In fact, I just had a thought when I'm discussing this. I think farmers and producers who are involved with sustainable agriculture tend to migrate to urban areas, while farmers who are in the monoculture, and when they fail, they're the ones who are committing suicides. So you'll find more suicides in monoculture areas. You'll find more migration from sustainable agriculture areas to cities. It's something I think so the index or somebody could look this up. It's just a thought that came to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's exactly what also the webinars like this are about. I mean, new research ideas. I think it's a really interesting research question. Rodrigo, do you have any comments on this kind of link between urbanization and food sustainability?
Yeah, I of course I dream in cities that are full of edible species. Why not planting food in the street? Why are our municipalities and local governments worried about the fruit falling in the street? How would that be possible to become a preoccupation in today's world? So what we need to do is to use everything that is planted already in the cities, but that unfortunately most of the cities do not have edible species in the urban areas. So we need to shift into perennial fruit species that are providing food for the people, that people can access with their hands. This is such a normal behavior for humans that we have lost, and then we need to recover. And if there's an existing tree that is not a fruit tree, then we adapt a climber. We adapt a different plant that will make that tree, that existing structure, into a fruit structure, into a food cell. And if we multiply that by all the square meters that are used in cities for plants, but non-edible plants, then we're gonna be able to solve the food crisis in the future, bringing the countryside to the city again.
Brilliant, thanks a lot. And that's exactly the kind of innovations we need, and how we kind of bring, urban areas and rural areas together in a kind of this synergy, the systems approach that you mentioned. with biodiversity at the heart. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. There's one quick question that I can just briefly answer. There's a question on, are you planning to developing a similar index for regions and companies? And definitely that's something really exciting. And, we would really like to collaborate. If anyone, is joining this webinar would like to work with us and see how we can make something like this happen, then definitely, this is definitely something, as a country level, this is something really important. And as we said before, working with different stakeholders around the food system, but then also going into regions and companies could be really exciting. So if you want to collaborate, please let us know. First of all, I would like to thank our great speakers, Arja, Rodrigo, Marta, for your great contributions. There's never enough time to discuss this great topic, but we're always keen to keep the conversation going. And just thank you so much for joining the webinar. And thank you to all of the participants for all your great questions. And you can find here the website where you can find the full study, impact.economist.com/projects/food sustainability. And you can access the full index with the map with all of the results for the 78 countries. You can download the workbook. There's an executive summary there. We also have a G20 focused paper from earlier last year. So there's lots of content there. Please have a look. So I'd like to thank the speakers again, and thank you all for your attention. And I'm very much looking forward to working with all of you for more sustainable food systems. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.